I'm originally from Seminole, Texas, which is a small town, about 6,000 on the western part of the state. Grew up just 30 minutes from the New Mexico state line. A lot of agriculture there, and of course the oil field, which my father worked for many, many years on the oil rigs. And so I'm one of three. My older sister, I'm the middle child, and then my younger sister. And so we grew up in this small town, Hispanic. At home we spoke Spanish, and outside the home we spoke English. About the age of 8 is when I really came to the realization that maybe priesthood would be part of my life. And I know that was an early age, but it really just happened when our pastor there really came to my mother and said, you know, I'd like David to be an altar server. And when she told me about it, it wasn't an idea that I didn't fight. It was just an idea that said, okay, well, you know, I'm too young right now. I'll think about it when it's time to think about it. I grew up with that idea. It was sort of the seed that was planted. And then at the age of 13, I met my first missionary oblate. And my father had introduced the idea of introducing me to the priest that had married them, probably about 22 years earlier. And so we, one day, drove over to the parish, to my parents' hometown of Big Spring, and met Father James P. Delaney, OMI, an Irishman who had come to the States immediately after his ordination in the 30s and had settled in Texas. And so I met him. He was probably up in the age of probably early 70s, mid 70s. And he, upon being introduced to him, he basically said, okay, what is your name? I told him my name, and then he says, how old are you? And I told him I was 13. And then he said, what would you like to be when you grow up? And so already with that idea about priesthood being planted in my mind since the age of 8, I responded with saying, you know, I don't know what I want to be. But there was something that from the inside of me, you know, I wanted to end the sentence there, but I mean, it was something that pulled me out and just said, my mother and my grandmother want me to be a priest. And that was exactly what he wanted to hear. And so from that moment, he took me under his wings. He immediately took me over to the office, and that's when he picked up his oblate cross, and he put it in my hands, and he says, if you want to be a priest, and if you want to be a missionary oblate, and if of course I'm not here, then this cross can be yours. And so that was the first time I took a look at the oblate cross and just fell in love with the simplicity but the powerful image of the crucified Christ. After he took me under his wings, he began to tell me many, many stories about the oblates, many stories about the missions, and that's when I became very much enthused about the oblate charism, the history that the oblates had, particularly in Texas. And then 8 months later, I was on my way to St. Anthony's High School Seminary at the time, so the juniorette that the oblates had in San Antonio. So I made the decision to leave my family at the age of 14 and travel 300 miles south to San Antonio and become a student with the oblates at St. Anthony's. And thoroughly enjoyed the 4 years. That was a time when we had many missionaries coming in from all over the world to speak to the student body. So when we had a visiting oblate, you know, we'd get together and hear about the missions. In particular, the Zambian mission was in full swing. They had just started it a few years before. And it was great to see these images of the oblates doing the missions, building up the missions and bringing in photos of the missions there, and of course the natives that were there. And it was just powerful. And so I left there at St. Anthony's, graduated, and then went on to the formation level, college level formation in Austin, Texas at St. Edward's University. And I was there 2 years, and decided that I needed to leave formation in order to figure out who I was. I knew that God was calling me, and I knew that the oblates were the group of men and brothers, priests and brothers that I was going to be with. And but I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was outside that religious context. And so at the age of 21, I exited the oblates And I think somehow another inside of me, I just basically said, that I need to figure this out on my own and not look back. And unfortunately, I not only closed the door to formation, I also closed the door to the Oblates, and I closed the door to my faith. And that began a number of years of me being absent, or at least non-practicing in my faith. And so I went through life. I went through college, going through college at that time, was establishing myself as a professional, especially when I finished my undergraduate, and just lived life aimlessly. I went after dreams that I thought that I was going to need to achieve, and I did, and I was successful. I was successful in my jobs that I had, and the people that I was meeting and networking and going after goals. I decided to go get my master's and accomplish that. And then, of course, as I began to ponder what was my purpose, what was my function, what was my calling in this life, I remember going after a few ideas. I was about to do a career change. I was working in higher education, and I was about to go into politics because I'm very, that is something that I can really get into. And it was probably right at the eve of when I was making that decision, that's when I had a friend of mine who told me, "Do you know Father Richard Hall? He's our new vicar at the Oblate Parish in town." I said, "Yes, I know him." "Well, he gave me a message because he remembers you. He wants you to come to Mass." And I hadn't been to Mass in years, and I basically laughed in my friend's face and just said, that's not for me. But it was exactly what I needed at that time. I didn't respond to the invitation until about 3 months later, when my older sister was living with me at the time in Austin. And on a Saturday night, I remember saying to her, "Hey, I think it's time to go to Mass. You want to go to Mass tomorrow?" I remember that morning very vividly, because we left the vehicle and I walked into the church. And it's an older church, and the smell of the candles, the scent that the candles give off, when I walked in, it was like a wall of that scent. And when I smelled it, it's like something in me innately woke up. And I remember telling myself, it's God who I have been looking for. It's God who I've been searching for. God is my function. God is my calling. And I remember at that point coming to that realization within me, and then I said to myself as I was walking into the church, "Okay, God, it's you that I've been seeking, and I promise that I will be with you." In that same Mass, when Mass started, it was Father Richard Hall who was the presider. And so that was a surprise. I didn't know that. When it came to the Gloria, when it came to singing the Gloria, the choir sang a version of the Gloria that I had not heard since St. Anthony's, my days in high school. And it was sort of a homecoming. And so as I began to sing, I also got very emotional. I got very emotional because I realized that it was God who's been missing from my life, and this is the Gloria in which we give Him praise. And so I remember breaking down. I remember breaking down at that point while singing the Gloria, and my sister looked over and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I remember telling her, "I'm having a moment, just leave me alone." And then all was fine. I composed myself until the gospel. Out of all the Sundays that I could have gone back to Mass, out of whatever time, I went back in which the gospel was the prodigal son. And I think that at that point, I remember telling myself that I was the prodigal son that had left years before. And instead of being timidly, coming into Mass and hiding within the crowd, it was God who was embracing me. It was God who was putting that ring on my finger, and He was putting the tunic. And my emotion was probably a response from just knowing that God was embracing me. And it was powerful. It was so powerful. I think I probably weep the rest of the Mass. But like I said, when Mass ended, I remember making that commitment again, that God, I reaffirm my faith, I reaffirm my belief in you, and you will always be in my life. And that was the beginning of the conversion. I applied with the Oblates in 2006, and in 2007 I heard back and I was accepted into the pre-novitiate program in Buffalo, New York. So I left Austin, Texas, a place I had lived in for 16 years, to enter into the Oblates. So that in 2007 I joined the Oblate formation program in Buffalo, finished my philosophy, went on to the Novitiate in Godfrey, and then professed first vows August 1st of 2009, and then went to San Antonio for the Scholasticate. Formation was difficult. It wasn't difficult. It was a renewal of who I and my calling. It was a renewal in my calling to the Oblates, and there were certain stages where I look at with a very great fervor, and there are stages where I look at where I really struggled in the sense of making sure that I was transformed into this calling. By the time I reached perpetual vows, I was very much humbled with the process, very much listening. My level of prayer life and commitment to the Oblates had really grown to a deeper level that I really didn't understand. It wasn't until I reached that day that I professed perpetual vows in 2013 that I realized that yes, this is my life and this is where I needed to be. Was ordained in May of 2014 and was assigned to the Shrine of Our Lady of the Snows in Belleville, Illinois. And I think in that first year of priesthood was just an affirmation that this is exactly where I should have been. And I should have been years ago, but I don't regret the decision of leaving formation initially, and then of course living those years of life for many, many years outside of the religious context. So it certainly has helped me in my priesthood, it certainly has helped me in my preaching, and it certainly has helped me in my relating to people, especially from that perspective of living life in general. So I'm very happy to say that I'm here. I'm accepting, the mission and the ministry that my spirits have given me, and I look forward to, many years of dedicated service and many years of working, especially under the charism of St. Eugene the Mazenot.